Roy Dains, welcome to ATV Talk. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Well, that's awesome. Hey, you know what? I want to go back into the beginning. What was it like when you guys were developing your skill sets on three wheelers?
Well, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on three wheelers and actually didn't start racing, what you might say seriously, until I started on four wheelers. I spent a lot of time as a youth on dirt bikes, which most of us did of our age. And then in the early 80s, of course, four wheelers started to make a little bit of an appearance with Suzuki and so on. And in 85, of course, Suzuki come out with the quad sport and the quad racer. And I didn't race three wheelers in any competition at all, just for pleasure use. And then in 85, when Suzuki released quad sport and quad racer, then obviously I ended up with both a quad sport and a quad racer, and just started out on some local racing, whether it was hare scrambles, TT, motocross. It didn't matter. Even did a little bit of ice racing. Just back in the day, there was really quite a lot of choices for us to go different places. There were even a few ATV only tracks back then. So it kind of made it nice that you had your own venue for the whole day. But yeah, and then basically got serious about racing in 85. And then 86, I started, a friend of mine who just recently passed away, Bill Lutz, had kept, saying to me, "Hey, Roy, you should try racing." He had already been racing. And I'm like, well, I did some local stuff, some backyard stuff per se. And he said, no, we should, do some GNCC racing. And I'm like, I don't know, Bill, I wasn't really familiar with it enough to actually know what I was getting into. I mean, I had some idea about it. I'd been to the races and watched it, but it's a little different when you're actually the rider. So that's how it kind of started for me. And my first race, this is kind of a little bit of a story, but that friend of mine, Bill Lutz, and I were going to go to my first GNCC together, and he had raced them before. So he talked me into going. This would have been in the spring of 1986. And they had already been to Florida that year, which we didn't go. But the next race that particular year was Loretta Lynn's. Um, it was kind of a crazy story, too. Bill and I, at the time, I worked at the local Honda shop in Rough Creek, which was Barnhart's Honda and Suzuki. And they had quite a few riders back then in the day. And Greg Barnhart, the owner, was able to get a hold of Honda prior to the Loretta Lynn's race in spring of 1986. And myself and Bill, I believe it was about 2 or 3 days before the actual race, we took his truck and drove all the way down to Virginia to the loading docks where the ships come in with all the overseas freight. In Honda, we went into the Honda warehouse there, and there's just stacks of crates to the ceiling like you wouldn't believe. And we were able to get two brand new 250R Honda four wheelers before they'd even made it to the dealer floors. And we turned around, loaded these up on his pickup truck, drove from Virginia back to southwestern Pennsylvania, put them together that night, rode them a very little bit the next day, and then loaded up and headed to Loretta Lynn's. Neither one of us had even signed the paperwork to own them, because the paperwork, we were ahead of the paperwork, basically. But we had gotten the permission through the dealership and through American Honda to get these, because Honda knows the significance of having their bikes on the racetrack, especially at that time, because Suzuki was dominant and they were the only thing out there. And so these things were brand new, stock tires, stock pipe. Greg Barnhart, the owner, knew that I preferred a twist throttle. So he actually, the night before we left, took my thumb throttle off and started hacking at the cable to be able to fit an old CR250 dirt bike throttle on it. And he managed to make it work, and I was much more comfortable with that. And so the next day, Bill and I loaded up, and we headed south to Loretta Lynn's with two brand new Hondas of basically were untested. I mean, obviously both of us knew what we were doing as far as riding them, but we didn't know, no spare tires, wheels, none of that stuff, because we really didn't have anything yet. I think that I bolted on an ATC 250R silencer, to eliminate that big spark arrestor on the back. And that was pretty much it. So,
How
yeah.
big was the crowd around you for looking at the bikes?
Well, it was really good. It was really kind of neat. We had a gentleman with us. We called him Tri-Moto Joe because back in the day he raced Yamaha three-wheelers, and he went as our mechanic. So the three of us go, and Joe's a really nice, clean-cut guy, and he's wearing all white overalls. So he looks like a factory Honda mechanic almost. So we had a lot of attention around these two bikes because everybody had only seen them or heard about them. Nobody physically had got to touch one yet. So we show up at the races, and this is my first GNCC. And to be quite honest with you, I'm a little bit clueless. I'm trying to just follow my buddy Bill around because I really don't know how the system works. So we go down to registration to register for the event. And I remember Dave Coombs gets on top of the hay wagon there, or whatever, the announcer's tower, whatever at the time. And he starts talking about the ATV crowd, the racers the crowd being so big that he needs to develop more classes, split riders up more. And, as the sport was growing back then pretty quickly. So he decided that they were going to have what we call the pro class, now the front row, A class, and then a B class, and then a C class, and then of course you have your senior and your four-stroke and things like that. So he decided to, instead of having a two-stroke class, you're going to have A and B classes now. So A class would be your typical pro class, your front row. So we're in line together and we're listening to Dave Coombs talk about this, and I really don't know. On a dirt bike, I was a B rider. That's just where I was on a dirt bike. So I'm in line with Bill, and I said, Bill, what class are you going to run? He said, I'm going to run A class. He said, what do you run? I said, well, I'm running A class too, because whatever you're doing, I'm doing. So we get almost up to registration. Bill says, I'm running B class. And I said, well, I'm running B class too. So I signed up in the B class that day, my first ever GNCC race. And I remember it was kind of strange because it hasn't happened since, and I don't know if it's ever happened since. We go down to the starting area, which is a field, and we started on the upper field, which actually had trees in it. So depending on where you're lined up, you might only go 20, 30 feet, and you've got to dodge a large maple tree. So we go down there to the start, and this is the only race that's ever happened to me. Dave Coombs gave us a parade lap. I found out later that he gave us a parade lap that day because there were a few high-profile riders running his series that day, and he wanted to give them a chance to go around the track and actually get to see some of the hills and the terrain. So we actually did a parade lap that day. Well, you can imagine a parade lap on a motocross track takes you a few minutes. A parade lap on a cross-country course, especially like Loretta Lynn's, it's a 30-minute venue for get everybody around the track. So I remember we go around the parade lap, we come back, of course everybody goes back, fills your quad up with gas, kind of maybe fresh goggles, gloves, depending. And I go back to the van and I top off my bike and stuff, and I'm there for a little while, and I'm not really paying attention to what's going on around me. And next thing I know, I look around and I don't see anybody, and it's real quiet. And I kind of panic. I'm like, what? And I put my helmet on, jump on the four-wheeler, and I take off down to the field. And here they're just getting ready to start the race. I wasn't really so knowledgeable enough to even know that I was going to miss the start if I didn't hurry up and get down there. So we run in the second row because we were the B class. We run down there and I get lined up, and lucky me, I got a tree in front of me in about 20 feet because I was like one of the last people there to line up. So I really didn't understand the concept of everything involved with the dead engine start. So I knew what to do. I just had never done it before. So the first row takes off, and I'm standing there, and I remember my bike, it fired right up, and I take off, and I'm the third person into the woods. I'm up front, and just go a short distance, and I see another four-wheeler like over the edge of the trail. Go a little ways longer, and there's another four-wheeler alongside a tree. He'd hit a tree or something. And I ran that whole race almost by myself. And I've never gotten since that day so tired, and I just cramped up. I probably didn't have enough water. Just didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But I did know that I needed to go as fast as I could, as long as I could, no matter what else I did. And I did. And I had no clue what place I was in or the understanding of how to race a 2-hour event and survive it and do well. So the whole race goes on. And another thing in the back of my mind, this is my first race. I've got a brand new four-wheeler that I haven't even made a payment on yet. Obviously, I was in no financial means back then to just go buy them and pay cash. And have you ever been to Loretta Lynn's or heard about it? I mean, Loretta Lynn's is one of those tracks. It's got plenty of rocks. It's got plenty of hills. It's got plenty of water. It's got a great mix of just all around terrain that would be typical to a GNCC. Well, those stock Honda tires were not very good. They didn't hold up to, actually putting them through the paces and bouncing off the rocks and the sharp edges and so on. But as the race went on, I'm not liking it. I honestly really didn't like it. I got really tired. Like I said, I cramped up, and I'm hearing all these rocks bang off of my brand new four-wheeler, and I'm just covered with mud, and just the whole atmosphere was like, I don't know about this now, Bill. This race is 2 hours long. I've never raced 2 hours before. So I'm not, to be honest with you, I didn't like it. So we get to the end of the race, and my buddy Bill, he was one of those guys, for some reason, he could keep his mindset on what place he was in, who was ahead of him, who was behind him. He just kind of had that awareness about him. Myself, I personally didn't care. I didn't know anybody there per se, other than Bill. And I didn't see him the whole race. So we weren't even together. And so we finished the race, and I go back to the van. The race is over, get the checkered flag, and I'm not really sure of anything other than when I get off my four-wheeler, I have 3 flat tires. The rims, of course, are all marked up, and I'm just covered with dirt and everything, and I am not a happy camper. So Bill pulls in a little bit after me, and he said, Roy, how was your race? I'm like, Bill, this is terrible. I said, look at my brand new bike. I said, it's trashed already. It was sitting there it looked horrible. I had 3 flat tires, and it's just sitting there looking weathered already. So Bill's like, well, he said, we got to Mama Hill, he said, and I got stuck once, and 3 guys passed me. So I know I finished at least 5th or 6th, whatever position it was. He said, he was out aware of it. And I'm like, Bill, I don't know what position I finished, and I don't care. I'm ready to go home. So we were loading up. Trophy presentation was going on at the actual general store, and we were camped above it. So we go to leave, and we can't leave because the crowd of people's around the area there where you would be driving, and they're giving out the awards and so on. And I'm laying in the back of the van. We've got the four-wheelers on the trailer, and I'm spent. I put everything I had on that 2 hours, and that was all I had, and I didn't want any more. So we're sitting there waiting for a trophy presentation to end, and I know I didn't get a trophy, so I didn't care. And Bill's like, I'm going to walk over there and see what's going on anyways, just check my score anyways, because Bill knew about where he was. So he's gone for a few minutes. I'm laying in the back of the van, and I'm not even paying attention. I get up, and I'm looking around, and I'm like disgusted. And Bill comes running back, and he's kind of waving his hand. He's yelling. He's like, Roy, you won, you won. I'm like, I won. He said, yeah, you won by 6 minutes. I said, oh, I really like this. This is a lot of fun. So right away, my attitude changed. And Bill's like, and that was the only GNCC race that they gave us a parade lap, and they actually gave out trophies that day. It's almost always been plaques from that day on. Actually, I've never gotten anything. That's the only day I ever received a stand-up trophy. from a GNCC. So anyways, we go back and I go up, and of course I get my award, and I'm all excited now because I got first place. I couldn't believe I didn't. For all I knew, I got last place, and ended up that day, I got first place in the B class and won by quite a distance. And Bill got like sixth or fifth, seventh, eighth, whatever. He got the last trophy that they gave out in that class that day. So we both got trophies that day, and we were both pretty excited. And that's really where it started for me, because I went from being pretty much disgusted to, oh, I really like this sport now. So that was spring of '86, and that's where it all started for me per se. And then on a Honda, and then that year I won every race in the B class except for one, and it was, I believe, Spring Tarentum, and this is like my second or third race, and we crossed the finish line to get the checkered flag. Well, to GNCCs, you take the checkered flag at one point, but you actually get scored at another point. So the checkered flag is ahead of the scoring system. So the race is technically over at the checkered flag, but you have to go get scored yet. And that scoring means that they're going to check your time, and you have a handlebar tag, and they're going to cut your tag off, and that has punch marks on it from the different checkpoints in the woods and so on. Well, between the checkered flag and the barrels, as we called it back then, I pulled off the track and was sitting there talking to my buddy. And then he finally realized, he said, Roy, why do you still have your handlebar tag on? I said, I guess nobody come and got it yet, And he's like, it doesn't work that way. So I jumped on my four-wheeler and went over to the score barrels. And the girl said, well, how long were you over there? And I said, I don't know. So they gave me second that day. I don't know if I won or if I technically got second. But so I ended up with 1 second place that year. And the last race of the year, the last race of the year was the Fall Tarentum, because back in the 80s, we would race the same venue sometimes twice a year. It would be a spring series there, or a fall series, or whatever, fall race there. And Dave Coombs did that a couple of his tracks for a few years till he was able to actually get out and get a lot more space and a lot more tracks. So that year was '86. That was my first full year of racing, and that was in the B class, so the amateur class per se. And the last race of the year was Tarentum. And remember, I was lined up in the B class, and I'm sitting there ready for the race to start. And Dave Coombs comes up to me, and he gets hold of me. He said, Roy, he said, I want to put you in the front row today. He said, you've already wrapped the B class up. Nobody can beat you. He said, I want to see how well you can do against these guys. So I'm like, okay, he's the promoter. I listened to him. I pushed my four-wheeler in the front row. So I'm lined up with guys like Mike Holbert, Tom Tokay, Teddy Trey, some of the guys back then, because that year we still had a lot of three-wheelers on the track and a lot of four-wheelers was mixing in. Well, it just so happened that year the points were tied between Teddy Trey and Tom Tokay for the championship. So whoever won that race between those two was going to win the title for the year. Now, Tarentum is a very hilly track, so it didn't favor the three-wheelers per se, but Teddy, he could ride a three-wheeler as good as anybody back in the day. So I line up beside these guys on the front row, the last race of the 1986 season, and I get the whole shot, and I take off, and I'm gone. And I'm leading the race, and I'm out there by myself. But I knew if those guys caught me, I wasn't going to give them a challenge. I was going to pull over and because I didn't want to mess with their series in their championship. So I don't know what lap it was, second or third lap, they caught me. And it was Tom Tokay and Teddy Trey. And I look behind me and I see them, they're right there. And I pull over and I let them both go. And I knew it was their race and their championship. And I followed them. So finally, I'm like thinking to myself, if you guys aren't going to go any faster than this, I'm going to pass you back. So I passed them both back and took back off again. Well, they caught back up to me again. Tommy Tokay was the first one to catch me. And there was a wood section where you could take a line to the left or the right of a group of trees. Well, I took one line, Tommy took the other line. When we came back together at the end where the two trails merged, we bounced off each other. In that particular year, that race, I was running Carlisle Strikers on the rear, turned around backwards with steel wheels. Well, when we bounced off each other, when my four-wheeler kicked sideways, I caught a tree just perfect enough. It popped that rim, the tire off the rim on one side. So right away, I had a flat tire. I managed to get back to the pits, get my tire changed, and got back out there and finished third for the day. Tommy actually won the championship that day. Teddy Trey ended up second on the three-wheeler. And for the day, I ended up third in that particular race. So that was my first A-class race, front row race, was Fall Tarentum of 86. And then in 87, I went, was on the front row the whole season in 87.
How did you feel going from the second line to the first line and then running up front right away?
Well, it's funny because as the season progressed, I was mixing up with those guys a lot. I would catch those guys quite a bit, and I would make myself into a top 10 rider. But as the B class, they wouldn't give you credit as being a top 10 rider because they only wanted the A class riders to have that per se overall score. So they wouldn't even, as a B class rider, that year in B class, I ran Blackwater that year of 86 in the B class. And I remember they had some factory Team Honda guys come down there. I don't know if it was Dale Wentworth. There's some different names back in the day that came to that race, and it was a big deal. And I ran the B class, of course, that year in 86. But I had overall, I actually had they have give me the credit, I was sixth overall that day at Blackwater. And it actually finished ahead of any of the Team Honda guys that were there that day. So I was really starting to, I guess, embrace it, do well. And it didn't seem like it mattered. Blackwater was clearly a notorious race in all aspects. To me, there's nothing been anything like it, since then and so on. But it was clearly, Blackwater separated a lot of people real fast.
How many Blackwaters did you get to race?
I did every Blackwater from 86 up to the last one, and I missed one between 86 and 93. So I was at Blackwater in 1985 as a spectator, and then went back in 86 actually as a contestant. Yeah. So I missed 1 year between 86 and 93.
No bike?
No. So as life changes come at you, you have to deal with them. And so when I was working at the Honda shop, of course, my schedule and lifestyle was strictly around motorcycles, ATVs, and racing. And Greg, the owner, he was a racer himself. So he allowed me to, take Saturdays and so on, and sometimes Fridays for travel time or whatever. And he didn't like it, but he knew that, it was the only way it was going to work for me to do it. And he raced a lot himself. So even he was, a little bit older than me, probably 12 years older than me, he would still occasionally the TT track or so on. He would occasionally beat me, so he would enjoy it. But yeah, so what had happened was, as life progresses, I got married in 1991. The wife and I started a family in 92 and 93, and I had stopped working at the Honda shop in the end of 88, and I got a real job, and I was working out of town. So I wasn't able to commit to racing in the series and things because life just got in the way of, and I was okay with that because my wife supported it the whole time we were doing it. And to be honest with you, it's just hard on you, and then trying to raise a family and, just, the expenses and, you can't miss work kind of thing and things like that. So that's the only reason I missed the one Blackwater that I did is I had to go to work per se. I was working out of town, so it really didn't make it possible. I didn't like the fact that I missed it, but at that time things just needed to happen that did. So
I get it. I guess I never grew up, and I've never stopped. I've always this is all I've ever done. I mean, being born into it is I guess a little different from my side of it. I mean, when my dad was doing the 9110s, the 185Ss, and the start of the 250Rs, right here where I'm sitting. And we never had a chance.
Yeah.
It was we didn't know it, but it was going to be our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was pretty lucky at the time I was, because Greg Barnhart from Barnhart's Honda, actually, he had owned that business. They just recently sold it. He'd had it for like 45 years or something. And they were like family to me. I mean, I literally lived at the Honda shop. I had an apartment above the actual Honda shop that Greg
Wow.
set me up with for free. I mean, actually, the money that I made there, I just turned around and put it right back into what I was doing at the time. It was just a vicious circle that I couldn't get out of. And really, I didn't mind it. I enjoyed it. The sport was good to me. Actually, I feel like it kind of made me who I am in a sense, because it's a commitment. If you're going to get sponsors and you're going to go out there and do it, and you're going to have any success at all, you've got to put the work in. And it's hard.
You got to go to the Blackwater reunion party they had.
I did.
How was it I don't know how many of the guys you still see, and what was it like for you to go and be with the people you used to race with?
Well, it's always great because the people like Teddy Trey were there, Tom Tokay was there, Chuck DeLulo was there, Norm Bish was there, several other guys, of course, were there, Jimmy Wise. A lot of people that you have history with, some of it not good as others, but it's still all good in the end. As you get older, you kind of forget about some of those things that you might have struggled with on the track with that particular rider or some situation or something. But that group of guys there was, they're the older, which you might say the older group of guys, because most of us now are, probably the youngest one of us is probably 59 to 60, up to 63, 64. But all good group of guys, and we get together now. It's enjoyable. We sit around, watch some of the old Blackwater videos. Of course, you talk about different races and different championships and different days and how things went and so on. So it's really nice because each person kind of has a memory that the other person needs to or wants to hear, because you forget about things. You actually do. And guys will, you remember that day when this happened or that happened? Um, we've lost a few riders, like Bob Sloan, things like that. Some guys that were very popular in the sport, but for one reason or another, no longer with us. So when you have a reunion, you just never know who might not make the next one. So it's kind of nice to get back together with the guys and just come back together as some old, per se, I guess you'd say, some old foes in a way, because we all got along. We never had per se incidents, but there's always that certain amount of competition built into each person. Everybody wants to win.
Well, you were in the era of the originals.
Well, yeah, to some extent, really. The sport really took off in the GNCC racing, and like I said at the time, in like 1987, after my first class, jumped up to the A class, I remember looking back on that year, and I think there was only maybe 3 or 4 weekends the entire year that I didn't go somewhere and race that whole year, simply because there was that much out there. I remember I was going down to Maryland and TT racing on ice, just something that I'd never done before. But, you screw a bunch of tires, put a bunch of screws in tires and you go racing. And, whether it was motocross or cross country or their local tracks, there was a track called Dream Mountain. And they did everything up there from a TT track to a motocross track. And they also had a hare scramble track, and they also had a drag strip. So we would go up there and, between changing your tires or your gearing or whatever, and you take one four-wheeler and you just, spend the whole weekend. They'd have a lot of weekend events and stuff, and they were an ATV only track. So it was super nice to have a place like that. And so, yeah, in 87, I took off, basically started the series in Florida. I went, in 87, now I'm a front row guy. I'm an A-class rider. I'm going to run the whole gauntlet. And I remember Greg Barnhart, the owner, he drove a pickup truck and hauled a trailer with all the four-wheelers in it. And I rode in a car with a friend of mine. And I remember talking to Greg. I said, Greg, I said, we're going to get down here and get our butts handed to us. I said, we don't know how to race in the sand. I said, it's never been something we've done. And he's like, well, we're going to do it. And he ran, I believe, either the senior class or the four-stroke class or something that day. And I ran on the front row. And I remember looking around me and seeing how these guys had their bikes set up, their ATV set up. And here I am, typical wood setup, with the larger tires and these guys are almost set up like motocross bikes, the locals down there that were racing. And I'm like, this ain't good because my bike doesn't look anything like his. And so I remember that day, got a good start, got off in the woods, and that sand down there, it just gets really whooped out. I mean, the track changes, and it takes a toll on you. And I remember Rodney Gentry passed me that day in a section that I would classify as whoops. He would probably classify as just normal terrain. And he was sideways, and he was left, and he was right, but he was on the gas, and he never let up. And I said to myself, if I can keep up with him, I'm going to be doing something today, because he obviously he was a named rider, and that day Rodney lapped everybody there. I'm talking everybody, all the way up to me, and I think I was either fourth or fifth overall that day. And I would have been, had we have had another full lap of racing, he would have probably caught me. But he was going that fast. I mean, I think that was the only race he did that year, and obviously he won it. But then after that, I think we went to Loretta Lynn's or something as the next race or whatever. But yeah, so that was my experience in Florida, starting off in '87, which wasn't a bad finish for being out of my element per se. But all my other guys were in the same element, so really you don't have any advantage or disadvantage. You just have the same track to deal with. So
did the locals beat up on you guys, and it was a mix mash?
Well, Rodney Gentry was really about the only local to come out on top. The rest of the guys that finished in the top 5 or top 10 were mostly the guys that were going to run the series. But yeah, he was set up, and he knew what he was doing as far as managing the terrain and so on, and riding in the sand. I mean, it's a little bit like riding in the mud, only different, I guess, in a sense, so.
Wait a minute. There's nothing about cross country that doesn't have mud.
I know. And even down there, I remember, in Florida, it's surprisingly muddy. Yeah, it is surprisingly muddy. It's a little different type of mud per se than what you get around the traditional East Coast. But yeah, so there's always a water crossing, and it turns into a little bit of a quagmire and so on and so forth. But yeah, it was all good. Yeah.
Did you ever get to travel to the West Coast and race?
Well, I got a story about the West Coast race. So this is in 1987. I'm on a Honda, and basically I'm pocketing everything out of my pocket. Honda gets a hold of me and says, hey, we'd like to do a little bit of advertising with you and so on, because I was doing good. I mean, I wasn't like beating everybody or anything by that means at all. And I said, well, is there any financial benefit for me? Oh, no, there's no financial benefit for you, but we want to throw some ads out there and a picture or two of you here and there, really just showing our four-wheeler doing what it does kind of thing. And they said, but we don't pay you for it or whatever. It's all just, it's for their benefit. And I was okay with that, because I felt that any recognition out there was better than none. And all I ever really wanted when I started racing the series was I wanted somewhere in some small column on the last page was to also say the finish line, 5th, 6th, 1st, whatever, didn't matter, that Roy Dains' name was in the magazine. So I really just wanted a little blurb that showed my name. I was that grounded that, I was just wanted that one little black and white stripe somewhere in a magazine that had my name in it, because as you're growing up, and I started out on motorcycles and doing a lot of racing. I had 2 brothers, one older, one younger. So we was always on motorcycles as kids growing up. And, always collected to put the pictures on the wall in your bedroom and stuff. The guys on the bikes, the old Bob Hannas and things like that. And, some of the guys that, so yeah, but anyways, back to the West Coast thing. So in 87 in June, which was Father's Day weekend, we go to Blackwater. And oh no, just prior to the Blackwater race in 87. Okay, Suzuki gets a hold of me and says, Roy, we want you to go to Olympia, Washington and race the GNCC there, which was the only West Coast race, GNCC race that year. And it was a long ways from Pennsylvania to get to Olympia, Washington. And a gentleman by the name of Rob Sanders, who was basically Suzuki's PR guy back in the day, got a hold of me. And I believe this would have been like in April or May of 87. And they wanted basically me to ride a Suzuki. So I talked to Greg Barnhart, which was kind of my mentor. And I said, Greg, I said, I'm on a Honda and I'm really doing good and I like it, And he's like, Roy, he said, is Honda calling you up, trying to get you to ride their bike? No, because you're already riding it. They don't care, but you got a chance to do something. If you want it, you're not going to get these chances very often. So Suzuki called me up and they made it really plain and simple. They said, Roy, here it is. It's a cut and dry deal. We'll have a brand new four-wheeler for you, all the gear, everything you need. We just need you there and you have to win the race. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. No second, third, fourth. We want you there. We want you to win the race. And so I thought about it, and Greg kind of convinced me. He said, Roy, you got to take a chance. So it's one race. So, okay. So we drive like 48 hours from southwestern Pennsylvania all the way to Olympia, Washington. Me, Greg Barnhart's dad, Paul, a gentleman named Stanley Cree, a friend of mine, and Scott Whipke, who was running the cross-country class as well, but he was a younger rider, so I'm not sure that he was either B or C rider then. But anyway, so we drive all the way out there, and we take Scott's Honda, and I don't take anything. We go to the local dealership, just like Suzuki said. There's a brand new Suzuki in the parking lot. We get there, they're already closed. Brand new Suzuki in the parking lot, a stack of tires and wheels, everything I needed, except for my own personal riding gear, in which I took. And so this bike has a pile of aftermarket parts sitting on the ground beside it, pipe, silencer, just odds and ends. And so I've got to get this bike prepped and get it ready for tomorrow's race. It's brand new, brand new. So I work on it. It's not like I didn't know what I was doing, but in a way I didn't know what I was doing. I was comfortable with my Honda and had it kind of set up to where it was fine. Well, I didn't realize that the difference in the altitude out there was huge. Like we started at one level, the race took off, and the very first part of the race was 6 miles up a mountain. Well, their mountains aren't like our mountains in Western Pennsylvania. Their mountains are legit. So I'm ringing this Suzuki out, and I'm doing good, and I'm thinking, I can win this race. It was early, but I'm thinking, I can win this race. And I get to the top of this mountain, and this Suzuki tightens up on me. It doesn't blow up on me, but the motor starts to seize, and I recognized it. And what had happened was I didn't realize or take into the effect that the leanness of this thing was really fragile out there in that environment as far as the jetting goes. So it ended up, I'm on top of this 6 mile mountain, and this bike is starting to tighten up on me, and I can't race anymore. And this is the first lap. So I'm looking around this mountain thinking, where can I push this Suzuki over the mountain? Because I was so mad. I mean, I went out there, and the fact that the bike tightened up on me was really on me because I didn't have the jetting proper. And I didn't have enough experience or knowledge, especially in that particular environment, to get it set right. And under the circumstances of the time that we had to work with and so on, unfortunately, it wasn't good. So I get back to the pits because basically I just coasted back down off of this big mountain. I mean, this thing was huge. We loaded this four-wheeler up. We took it back to the parking lot, left everything in the parking lot on a Sunday or whatever, and we started driving back to Pennsylvania. And that was it for Suzuki. They gave me a chance and I failed. I really did, you know. And the very next race was Blackwater. And I'm back on my Honda. That was 1987 Blackwater. You see this little plaque behind me. That was the overall from the 1987 Blackwater. I won the overall that day on my Honda. But wouldn't you know it, the very next day I get a phone call. It's Rob Sanders at Suzuki. And Rob said, Roy, he said, do you remember how we talked about that race out in Olympia, Washington? I said, yeah, Rob. He said, forget about that. We're giving you Suzuki. We want you on our bike. I'm like, what kind of deal we got, Rob? Rob says, here's the deal. And Suzuki basically, it was free bikes, free parts, free. They set me up with Clem Research back then. All the motor parts I wanted, whatever I told Clem I wanted, Dave was going to build for me, this, that, and the other. It was basically an open book for parts and bikes, but it was only going to be paid out per results. So in other words, if I wasn't finishing in the top 5, I wasn't going to make anything. Suzuki was only going to pay me by my finishes. And I was okay with that. I felt that, I could still do well on it and make some money at the same time, because any income was better than, because my sponsors at that time, Weisco, and of course, some different people helped me out. It was all just parts. None of it was any financial income. So I ended up getting on a Suzuki the very next race after Blackwater, and finished the year out with Suzuki. Did well, won 1 or 2 races, and I was okay with it. I liked the fact that I was getting help. Free four-wheelers is, for me, paying for everything that I've been doing, it was super. And plus, we were a Honda and a Suzuki dealership, and I would call Suzuki up every Monday after a race and give them a report on everything, how it went down, what I finished, and so on. And they would transfer me over to the parts department, and I would give them a list of parts, and in a couple of days, I'd have a whole bunch of whatever I wanted. It didn't matter. I mean, Dirt Wheels come and did a couple articles with me and stuff. I made the cover of Dirt Wheels, 1 issue, so that was extremely, it was extremely nice. And they actually raced one of my spare bikes or ATVs at Blackwater one year, and the gentleman, I think it was Phil Beckman, maybe, had flipped it off a 93 river crossing and it pretty much destroyed it. But Suzuki sent me a new frame. They really liked it because, when you give the magazine editor a four-wheeler to ride, they're going to do articles on it, and so it was all more publicity for them and so on. So it was all good. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Finished out the year in '87 on a Suzuki, and then raced the 1988 season on a Suzuki the whole season. So didn't win. What's that?
Same deal.
Same deal. Yep, same deal. And Suzuki, I don't know if you ever worked with Rob Sanders or knew Rob Sanders. He was a gentleman. He was Suzuki's brass at the time, when it comes to the off-road stuff. And I remember in '88, went to Loretta Lynn's in '88 on a Suzuki, and Rob flew in from California to watch the race. And they actually had my picture on the T-shirt for that particular day. And I remember Rob coming up to me and saying, "Hey, Roy, look, because it was a Suzuki and so on, and he was pretty excited about it." And I remember I didn't even have enough money that day at the races to buy my own T-shirt because, basically I'm just living race to race. But yeah, it was all good and it was all enjoyable. Winning 2 Blackwaters was clearly kind of what really escalated my name per se. Or, I had some top riders who won championships said, "Roy, I'd have just loved it. I'll trade you all my wins for your Blackwater," because that was kind of, the Indy 500 per se. It was the big race. And
so you won 2. What you won '87 and what other year?
1989.
Man,
yeah.
What were you riding in '89?
I was riding a 1986 TRX 250R on about its 40th GNCC race. I mean, it was an older. So my story kind of changes a little bit because I finished the '88 season with Suzuki. Unfortunately, what happened to my separation from Suzuki wasn't anything to do with Suzuki. I have a couple brothers, like I said, and I have one brother that's 11 months younger than me. We were kind of, all of us brothers were close growing up. He would come out and he would race occasionally as just, a weekend warrior kind of thing, Well, we were at the Pioneer Motorcycle Club up in Ohio racing a GNCC. It was real dusty that day. And in the very first turn in his class, I believe he ran the 4-stroke B class that day. He crashed in the first turn. It was so dusty, and another rider didn't see him and ran him over. And my brother got paralyzed that day. So it was kind of tough, you know.
Right.
That changed a lot for me because it hit home. So when I got home, I called Suzuki and I told them, it was funny. I raced that day and I finished the race, and I didn't know my brother's accident happened until after the race. But when I got home that weekend, I called Suzuki the next day on Monday or whatever and gave them the report and said, hey, I've really enjoyed this and I thank you for the opportunity. But I think there was 1 or 2 races left of the series after that race. And I said, that's my final race because I got to sort things out in life per se. It just really. So even though I was doing,
it changed everybody's life.
it did. It's unfortunate, but that's part of the sport, and we know it's part of the sport. We just when it per se touches home, it's actually a different part of the sport per se. So I finished the season off with Suzuki that year, and that was '88. In '89, I only raced 1 GNCC before Blackwater, and I remember pulling into Blackwater, and Mike Colbert, he's a very good rider, and Mike had a lot of success, 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers, and so on. And I'd seen Mike when I first pulled in, and he said, "Hey Roy," he said, "these guys are going a lot faster. You missed 3 or 4 races already this year." He said, "There's no way you can run with these guys anymore." He said, "They've just upped the ante that much." And but Blackwater has a way of being an equalizer. It's kind of like its own unique event. It's completely different. And that really wasn't intimidated by it, but I kind of used that to feed off of, I guess, a little bit. And my brother was there, the one that got paralyzed, and my other brother was there too. Our whole family had always been involved in going together per se. We almost all raced, and we were all just enjoyed it. But he was there, and I remember riding that race in a little bit of a different mental mindset because I wanted to do really well. I wanted to cross that finish line first. And when I did, he was sitting there in his wheelchair and he was happy as I was. And I raced that race kind of a little bit, I guess, more on the throttle and less using my head per se. And I just, Hondas they're bulletproof in a sense. And I had a great day and ended up winning that day. So in Blackwater of '87, then I won. Actually, Tom Tokay come across the finish line just 1 position ahead of me. He was right ahead of me, but on adjusted time, I had won. And then in '89, Bob Sloan finished right ahead of me, but I knew we were racing against each other on the last lap, but I knew all I had to do was stay close to him because I think he started on the first row that day and I didn't. And so I won both of them by crossing the checkered flag second, but with the adjusted times, I was well ahead for the win. So yeah, but we had some pretty neat. In '88, I was on a Suzuki at Blackwater, and I didn't finish good that day. I actually got lost during the race, and I remember when I got to '93 River Crossing, the mud fleas are there, and I'm sure you've probably seen some videos and stuff. They really don't want you to go anywhere but where is per se worst case scenario. A lot of them, because they're standing on solid ground. If you go where they're standing, there's probably traction and stability there. They want you to go. So, anyways, I remember I come into the river crossing in '93 and 1988 on my Suzuki, and all of a sudden I'm getting drowned with these people. They're splashing water on me, they're pouring beer on you, and they're just screaming and yelling at you. And they start grabbing my 4-wheeler and dragging me down the river. And they're yelling at me saying, "You got to get off the track because the leaders are going to be coming through." And I was like swinging at them like, "I am the leader. You got to get out of my way so I can keep going." It was just chaos like that was uncontrolled. but
Right.
it also made for the racing. It really did. I mean, if you got stuck somewhere, they'd love to see you get stuck or have problems, but in the same sense, they would help you out just as well. So
They loved you to get stuck so they could get you out.
they did love you to get stuck. I mean, they were clearly out of control. There was no way to control them because the people were there to party, and there happened to be a race that weekend at the same time. It ended up being such a blur between people that were there just to drink alcohol and really be disruptive to the people that were there to actually run the event and try to do well. But yeah, one of the funny stories I got from Blackwater, because I'm lucky enough that I had some good luck at Blackwater. I mean, I never ended up one of those stranded out there for 3 hours after the event was over and so on. And but as you were racing around the track, there were so many spectators out there on ATVs and dirt bikes and so on that were on the same track as you, whether they be coming towards you or they were beside you or you had to go around them, because they used that same track to go out to the 93 Moon Rocks or the river crossings or whatever, the bogs or whatever. And I was behind this guy and his girlfriend on a dirt bike. And we were in some tight woods and stuff, and I'm yelling at him, and you get exhausted a little bit by yelling at people because it takes a little bit out of you, and your adrenaline's, and finally, it just seemed like a long time because that you got to do well, and you've got to take advantage of every opportunity there. And it's the only time I ever did this to anybody, but the gentleman finally slowed down enough that I got up beside him and I just picked my foot up and I literally kicked him and his girlfriend over as I was just so mad, and I just kind of pushed them over with my foot and caused them to wreck it intentionally. But yet it's just like, you got to get off the track because, we're racing here and you're not.
I was fortunate enough to go to one.
Yeah. What year was that?
I don't even remember. I think it was 92,
Yeah.
91.
Yeah.
And it was quite the experience, quite the shocking experience for me.
Yeah.
I never seen anything like that.
Yeah, we would literally one year we took a hog down and butchered a hog and roasted it all weekend over the fire the whole weekend, and we would be out mud fleeing or whatever on Sunday. We'd come back and have lunch already there. I mean, we would go down literally and absorb the whole weekend. It was just the greatest thing back then. It really was. It was a lot of fun, a lot of memories, and a lot of chaos, all wrapped up into having an ATV motorcycle racing. And of course, we were real big on being mud fleas for Sunday, going out with the bikes and stuff. And we knew where to go because racing it the day before was pretty much the same track. And we knew where a lot of the hard sections were going to be and the places that we could watch and see some good racing and stuff. So it was really quite enjoyable. Blackwater was. I miss it. I mean, even if they brought it back, I'm sure I still have a 1987 250R in the garage. I'm sure it would be there, with me on it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
When you talk about it, you have two kids. What do they think about, basically you had a factory ride. So basically their dad was a factory rider, and being a two-time Blackwater champion kind of puts you in a special crowd. Do they have any idea what it's really all about?
It's funny. I never per se beat my own drum in a sense. I mean, I was with a gentleman yesterday, and it was funny. I went down to Maryland yesterday to look at a four-wheeler, and it was the same route I would have taken to go to Blackwater. So of course I'm remembering all the roads and so on, and I got to talking to that gentleman down there about it, and of course he knew all about it. He lived down that area and stuff, and he was about my age and stuff, and he was telling me all about it. But I never did even tell the gentleman that I had won it twice, or because for some reason I've never been that person to just brag about it per se. I mean, my wife, I'll be around other people and they'll tell people about it, and they'll look at me and say, "Is she telling is that right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right." "Are you sure?" It's funny because I mean it was something that I did and I was successful at, but I don't know why I'm still not comfortable telling everybody that. I guess in a way I don't know whether you're boasting or bragging or whatever. I just, I did.
Somebody's got to hey, somebody's got to ring your bell. Might as well be
Yeah,
you.
yeah. But my kids, my son, after he got a little bit bigger, I took him and we did a lot of the GNCC races. He did the youth class. He was a youth class champion one year and stuff. And my son wanted to be an ATV racer in a sense. And my wife and I both tried to ground our kids to pay attention to your schooling, your education, and so on. Because at one time, your kids, they're an age, they're impressionable. They think that they can race their ATV for life or whatever. And my son, we still actually, every New Year's Day, we have a traditional ride. And my son rode his ATV. I rode my old 250R on New Year's Day. And we rode together and stuff. But he had stopped racing maybe 13, 14, 15 years old or whatever, in a sense that we were going all the time. And I told him, your education is utmost important. And he went to college right out of high school. And it's been the best thing for him. I mean, he still rides. He's got a dual sport, a dirt bike, a four-wheeler, and side by side, So we do enjoy the sport still. But he's now married and has 2 kids. So he's gone through, life's curves as well. But my daughter, she's never really, I don't know, she used to race just a little bit when she was younger, but I never really took her per se and I guess ran her through the mill in a sense. My son, he really enjoyed it and he was good at it. My daughter more or less did a lot of things with my wife and so on. So it was all good.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty awesome. Roy, I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us. That's incredible stuff. I really enjoyed it because you're telling me things that I didn't know that had happened, and I really appreciate it. I also want to extend it to you that there's probably going to be a group show, and so look for an invitation for that. And again, I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to share us with your family and friends. The podcast is available on all streaming platforms, and you can find us on social media as ATV-TALK Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter.